Welcome to Dreamy Mystery. Here's what makes no sense about the Anunnaki and why their story has quietly captivated historians, archaeologists, and even fringe theorists for decades. Ancient Sumerian texts, etched into clay tablets thousands of years ago, describe beings they called, quote, in ways that are profoundly, almost jarringly ungodlike by our common understanding. We picture gods as ethereal, omnipotent, benevolent, perhaps distant, or at least beyond the mundane concerns of mortals. But the Anunnaki, the cuneiform accounts portray them as beings who arrived on Earth, who performed manual labour, who fought amongst themselves with surprisingly human-like emotions, jealousy, anger, ambition, and who, crucially, had a very specific, tangible reason for being here: resource extraction. They needed something from our planet, and their methods for getting it, according to these oldest written records, profoundly shaped human civilization. The paradox is this: if these were truly divine, all-powerful entities, why did they toil in mines? Why did they create humanity not out of pure benevolence, but seemingly out of necessity as a workforce? This contradiction, this fundamental dissonance between the traditional concept of a god and the gritty, almost industrial descriptions of the Anunnaki and their own foundational myths, is the beating heart of the mystery we're about to unravel. It's what makes their story endlessly fascinating, challenging our preconceived notions of history, religion, and even our own origins. If you're enjoying this journey through history, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And I'm always curious. Drop a comment letting me know what city and time zone you're watching from. There's something special about knowing this story is reaching people all over the world. Think about this for a second. Why do so many ancient cultures, separated by vast oceans and millennia, share strikingly similar narratives of powerful beings descending from the sky, bringing knowledge, establishing civilization, and often interacting directly with humanity? It's a question that, when you dig into it, genuinely rattles the foundations of traditional history. And nowhere is this narrative more explicit, more detailed, than in the dusty ancient land of Sumer, where the story of the Anunnaki first took root. Our journey begins not with grand pronouncements, but with the quiet, methodical work of archaeologists and linguists in the 19th century. Imagine the scene: European excavators, often adventurers as much as scholars, unearthing vast libraries of clay tablets from the ruins of forgotten cities in Mesopotamia, places like Nineveh, Ur, and Nippur, and, for centuries, these wedge-shaped markings known as cuneiform were an enigma. Then, slowly, painstakingly, brilliant minds like Henry Rawlinson began to crack the code, translating the Akkadian and then the older Sumerian languages. What they found was not just administrative records or king lists, but epic poems, creation myths, and detailed accounts of beings unlike any other. These were the stories of the Anunnaki, a term that in Sumerian means those who from heaven to earth came. These texts, dating back as far as the 3rd millennium BCE, describe a pantheon of powerful beings, but they are not abstract forces of nature. They are concrete, physical entities with names, genealogies, and distinct roles. At the apex was Anu, the Sky Father, residing in the heavens. His primary sons, Enlil and Enki, were the most active on Earth. Enlil, often depicted as a stern, commanding figure, was the lord of the air and earth, responsible for order and enforcing decrees. Enki, the lord of the abyss and wisdom, was the master craftsman and engineer, often portrayed as more benevolent and cunning. These weren't distant, unknowable gods. They were an active, involved, and often fractious ruling council. This is where it gets genuinely interesting. The Sumerian texts, particularly the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic drawing heavily from Sumerian sources, and the Atrahasis epic, don't just describe these beings as arriving. They describe them as working. These gods weren't just receiving worship. They were engaged in manual labor, specifically mining precious minerals. The Atrahasis epic, for instance, details how the junior Anunnaki, known as the Igigi, were forced to dig channels and clear land, their toil described in vivid, almost sympathetic terms. Quote 3. This is a far cry from the effortless divine creation we often associate with deities. Imagine this early Sumer, a vast flat plain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, dotted with burgeoning city-states like Uruk, Eridu, and Lagash. The ziggurats, those massive stepped pyramids, were not just temples. They were seen as dwellings for these skyborn beings, places where the divine and mortal worlds intersected. The air would have been thick with the smell of clay and reeds, the rhythmic sound of cuneiform being pressed into wet tablets by scribes, and the murmur of prayers directed not at an abstract deity, but at specific Anunnaki lords whose presence was believed to be very real. These scribes, meticulously carving their stories into durable clay, were recording what they believed to be their true history, passed down through generations. Nobody talks about this, but the very word, Gaya quote, itself, meaning dan quote, or dan quote, sect, suggests a lineage, a hierarchy, rather than an all-encompassing singular divine force. They possessed advanced knowledge, particularly in engineering, agriculture, and metallurgy, which they allegedly imparted to early humanity. They built cities, established laws, and even designed the very structure of Sumerian society, with kings acting as intermediaries between the Anunnaki and the populace. The Sumerians viewed their entire civilization as a direct gift, a carefully orchestrated project initiated by these beings from the stars. The historical accuracy here lies in the faithful translation of these ancient texts. Academics generally agree on the literal meaning of the cuneiform signs. Where the debate ignites is in the interpretation. Are these elaborate metaphors for natural forces or human endeavours? Or are they, as some suggest, literal accounts of non-human entities who visited Earth? The sheer specificity of the narratives, the detailed grievances of the Igigi, the specific tasks assigned, the very human-like squabbles between Enlil and Enki, makes a purely metaphorical reading feel, at times, inadequate. These beings get hungry, they feel fatigue, they need housing, and they suffer from the heat. This physical vulnerability and reliance on Earth's resources for their own sustenance is a profound characteristic. So the Sumerians weren't just worshipping gods. They were, in their own understanding, living under the direct governance of an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional ruling class. The consequences of this belief system permeated every aspect of their lives. Their laws, their social order, their scientific understanding, and their very purpose were all derived from the Anunnaki. They believed they were created to serve these powerful beings, to alleviate their burden, and to sustain their presence on Earth. This radical reinterpretation of the divine as a tangible, physical, and even demanding force sets the stage for the next crucial question. If the Anunnaki came to Earth and needed labour, what exactly was their grand project? What specific resource were they after, and how did humanity come to be the solution to their problem? But that's a story for the next chapter, when we delve into the extraordinary purpose of the Anunnaki's mission and the controversial, yet profoundly detailed, account of humanity's creation as an engineered workforce. Welcome back to Dreamy Mystery, where we peel back the layers of history to reveal truths often overlooked, or perhaps deliberately hidden. In the previous chapter, we began our journey into the enigma of the Anunnaki, those beings who, according to ancient Sumerian texts, from heaven to earth came. We saw them not as ethereal gods, but as physical entities, arriving with a purpose, toiling with their hands, and exhibiting all too human emotions. The paradox was stark. Why would divine beings, masters of the cosmos, descend to a dusty ancient land to engage in back-breaking labour? This brings us to the beating heart of the mystery. What precisely were they seeking? And why was it so crucial that it necessitated such an extraordinary undertaking, culminating in the very creation of humanity? Let's delve deeper into the ancient records, etched into clay tablets that have survived millennia, to uncover the resource that drove the Anunnaki's relentless quest. While the texts don't always name it with modern scientific precision, they paint a vivid picture of a precious mineral, one that required extensive mining and processing. Many modern interpretations, drawing from various ancient accounts and cross-referencing mythological clues, point to a specific element: gold. Think about this for a second. If you're a technologically advanced civilization capable of interstellar travel, why would you need gold from a nascent planet like Earth? It's not just about adornment or currency, as we understand it. The prevailing theory, one that genuinely rattles the foundations of conventional history, suggests that gold wasn't merely a commodity for the Anunnaki. It was perhaps a critical component for their survival, or for the very functioning of their advanced technology, potentially even to repair the atmosphere of their home planet, which some theories suggest was in peril. This idea transforms the Anunnaki from whimsical deities into desperate, resourceful beings on a mission. Imagine the scene: a vast landscape between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, not yet the fertile crescent we envision, but a raw, untamed land. The air would have been thick with the smell of clay and reeds, the sounds dominated by the rhythmic clang of tools against rock, the shouts of overseers, and the groans of the labourers. These labourers, as we learned, were the Igigi, the junior Anunnaki, tasked with the grueling physical work. They were digging canals, clearing land, and most strenuously, extracting this vital mineral from deep within the earth. We find descriptions of them in texts like the Atrahasis epic, lamenting their fate, their backs aching, their spirits broken. For 40 long periods, some interpretations suggesting 40 Shah or cycles, potentially thousands of years, the Igigi endured this crushing burden. They dug the channels, maintained the irrigation systems, and toiled in the mines, all under the stern command of their superiors, particularly Enlil, the Lord of Command. The sheer scale of this operation, described in painstaking detail, underscores the profound importance of their mission. This wasn't a casual endeavour. It was an existential imperative. But even, quote 10, have their limits. And this is where the narrative takes a pivotal dramatic turn that directly impacts our own existence. The Atrahasis epic describes a breaking point. The Igigi, exhausted and resentful, eventually laid down their tools. They had had enough. Quote 11, they declared. They gathered, set fire to their tools, and surrounded Enlil's dwelling, demanding an end to their unbearable toil. This was no mere labour dispute, it was a mutiny. Now, picture the scene in the Anunnaki council chambers. The senior Anunnaki, Anu, Enlil, Enki and the others, are in crisis. Their vital resource extraction has ground to a halt. Their workforce, their own kind, has rebelled. What do you do when your very survival, or the success of your mission, hinges on a workforce that refuses to work? This is where Enki, the Lord of Wisdom, the master craftsman and engineer, steps forward. Enki, often portrayed as the most benevolent and cunning of the Anunnaki, proposes a radical solution. He suggests creating a new being, a primitive worker, to take on the burden of the Igigi. This isn't just a clever idea, it's a profound declaration of intent, an intent to engineer life itself. The texts are remarkably explicit about this creation process. It wasn't a divine decree from on high, nor a magical wave of a hand. It was an act of scientific, almost laboratory-like experimentation. Enki, with the assistance of the birth goddess, Ninti, also known as Ninhursag, begins to craft this new being. They don't just sprinkle stardust, they use tangible components. The key ingredients, as described in the ancient tablets, are clay and the blood of a god. But this isn't just any clay, nor any blood. The quote 15 is often interpreted as the primordial matter of Earth, perhaps even the genetic material of an indigenous hominid species already present on the planet. And the Yamnakul's quote 16, the tablets specify that an Igigi, named Wielu, or a Wheelam, meaning quote 17, is sacrificed. His blood, containing his quote 18 or quote 19 is then mixed with the clay. Think about the implications of this. It's not a metaphorical divine spark bestowed by an ethereal being. It's the literal genetic material, the quote 21 doors, of one of the Anunnaki, deliberately combined with terrestrial elements. This suggests a sophisticated understanding of genetics, of DNA, long before humanity even conceived of such concepts. The Anunnaki weren't just gods, they were advanced geneticists, bioengineers on an unprecedented scale. The purpose of this creation is brutally clear and consistently articulated across the texts. Let him bear the yoke of the Igigi, the tablets declare. Let him carry the work of the gods. Humanity, the Lulu Amelu, the primitive worker, was not created for worship nor for spiritual enlightenment. We were created out of necessity, to serve as a workforce, to alleviate the Anunnaki's burden, to ensure the continuation of their resource extraction. This is where the conventional narratives of human origins begin to unravel for us. If we are to take these ancient texts literally, as many scholars and fringe theorists are now daring to do, then our very existence is the result of an urgent, pragmatic decision by an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional ruling class. We are, in essence, an engineered species, designed with a specific task in mind. The Anunnaki then proceeded to Kanji quote 25, the first humans, creating 7 males and 7 females, who were then able to reproduce and multiply. These were not mere automatons. They were given enough intelligence and capability to understand and execute complex tasks. The quote 26 that the Sumerians later attributed to the Anunnaki, agriculture, writing, city planning, laws, metallurgy, can be reinterpreted through this lens. Were these truly altruistic gifts from benevolent deities, or were they tools and systems put in place to make their engineered workforce more efficient, more productive, and capable of sustaining themselves while performing their assigned duties? Consider the cities themselves. The Sumerian texts describe Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, and other iconic ancient metropolises as foundations laid by the Anunnaki. These were not just places of dwelling, they were logistical hubs, administrative centres for managing the vast workforce and the resource operations. The ziggurats, often seen as temples to the gods, might also have served as command centres, observation posts, or even launch pads for these quote 27 beings. The implications of this interpretation are profound. If our origins are tied to an engineered purpose, what does that say about our inherent nature? About our drives, our struggles, our very will to toil and build? Are we still, in some subconscious way, carrying the quote 28? This narrative challenges us to look beyond simplistic interpretations of quote 29 and quote 30. The specificity of the accounts, the detailed descriptions of labour, rebellion, and a biological creation process demand a different kind of inquiry. It forces us to ask, what if the Sumerians weren't just telling fantastical stories, but were meticulously recording their history as they understood it, of the beings who literally shaped their world and created their ancestors? The truth you haven't heard, or perhaps haven't dared to fully consider, is that the Anunnaki weren't gods in the spiritual sense, but perhaps a highly advanced, resource-driven civilization that found our planet ripe for extraction. And in their moment of need, they created us. As we move forward, we'll explore the reigns of these Anunnaki rulers, their internal conflicts, and the growing complexity of their relationship with their human creations. We'll uncover more evidence that suggests a presence far more tangible and influential than mere mythology allows. The story of our origins, according to these ancient texts, is far stranger and more compelling than we've ever been told, and it leaves us with one burning question. If we were created to serve, what happened when that service was no longer required? Join us next time on Dreamy Mystery as we continue to unravel this extraordinary saga. We left off with the profound, almost chilling realization that our very existence, according to these ancient texts, began not with divine love or spontaneous evolution, but as a calculated act of genetic engineering. Our purpose was stark: to bear the yoke, to toil, to extract the gold that the Anunnaki desperately needed. But what happened next? Did we simply become mindless drones, or was there more to this incredible, unsettling story? Let's dive back into the dusty ancient lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, where the air would have been thick with the smell of clay and reeds and the heavy presence of our creators. The Sumerian tablets, those meticulously etched records, tell us that the newly engineered humans did fulfill their purpose. We were, by all accounts, a resounding success. The gold mines, which had strained the Igigi to their breaking point, now thrived under the tireless hands of our ancestors. We dug the channels, cleared the land, built the cities, and provided the Anunnaki with the resources they required. The burden of labour was lifted from the Yagas, quote 32, and in return they oversaw their new workforce. But this is where the narrative takes a turn that genuinely rattles the foundations of our understanding, a paradox that defies simple explanation. If humanity was merely a labour force, a subservient species designed for one purpose. Why did the Anunnaki then bestow upon us the very tools of civilization? Why teach their, quote 33, to read, to write, to build complex structures, to understand the stars, to cultivate the land with sophisticated methods? It makes no sense if we were simply meant to be glorified automatons. Think about this for a second. The Anunnaki, these beings who, quote 34, had a clear objective, gold. They created us to get it. Yet, the same texts that describe our genetic origin also paint a vivid picture of the Anunnaki acting as architects, teachers, and even benevolent rulers. They didn't just point us to the mines, they established the very framework of what we recognize as civilization. We see this everywhere in the Sumerian accounts. Take the city of Eridu, often cited as the first city in the world. Its founding is attributed directly to Enki, the Lord of Wisdom, the very one who engineered humanity. He didn't just create us, he laid out the principles of order, the me, which were essentially divine decrees governing all aspects of civilization, from kingship and priesthood to crafts and justice. These weren't lessons for slaves. These were blueprints for a society. The Sumerians tell us that the Anunnaki taught them agriculture, transforming hunter-gatherers into settled farmers, showing them how to irrigate the arid lands and grow abundant crops. They taught us metallurgy, how to extract and work with metals, far beyond what would be needed for simple tools. They taught us mathematics, a complex system of base 60, which we still see echoes of in our timekeeping and geometry today. And perhaps most profoundly, they taught us writing, cuneiform. Initially, cuneiform, those wedge-shaped marks etched into clay tablets, was used for record keeping, inventories of grain, counts of livestock, administrative decrees, but it quickly evolved into a sophisticated system for literature, law, and history. Why would a master race provide its labor force with the means to record their own stories, to articulate their thoughts, to question their existence? This is the beating heart of the mystery, isn't it? The gift of knowledge seems inherently contradictory to the role of a subservient species. We believe that the answer lies in the Anunnaki's pragmatism, coupled with perhaps the evolving nature of their own internal dynamics. Imagine overseeing a vast network of mining operations and a burgeoning human population. To maximize efficiency, you need more than just brute strength. You need organization, management, and specialized skills. Teaching humanity to farm ensures a stable food supply for the workers. Teaching them to build allows for the construction of temples, storehouses, and administrative centers. Teaching them to write allows for complex record-keeping, resource allocation, and communication. It wasn't pure benevolence, at least not initially. It was about creating a more effective, self-sustaining workforce, and, crucially, a more ordered society that could serve their needs with minimal direct intervention. The Anunnaki, after all, still saw themselves as the ruling elite, the Pisces, quote 35, who dictated the terms of existence. They established kingship among humans, but these kings were merely intermediaries, chosen by the Anunnaki to rule on their behalf, to ensure their decrees were carried out, and to maintain the tribute flow. The magnificent ziggurats that dotted the Sumerian landscape were not just temples, they were administrative centers, granaries, and symbolic ladders connecting Earth to the heavens, to the Anunnaki themselves. Yet, As humanity grew in numbers and sophistication, as we began to master the skills imparted to us, our relationship with the Anunnaki started to shift, subtly at first, then more profoundly. We were no longer just the Lulu Amelu. We were now the Sumerians, building cities, developing culture, and perhaps beginning to ask questions. The Sumerian texts hint at growing tensions within the Anunnaki ranks too. Remember Enlil, the stern lord of the air and earth, and Enki, the lord of the abyss and wisdom. Their personalities, even their agendas, often clashed. Enlil, it seems, grew increasingly frustrated with humanity. He saw us as noisy, unruly, and multiplying too rapidly. There are accounts in texts like the Atrahasis epic, where Enlil complains bitterly about humanity's clamour disrupting his rest, and he devises plans to reduce our numbers through plagues, famines, and droughts. This is where the ancient story aligns with one of the most enduring myths across cultures, the Great Flood. The Sumerian account, predating the biblical narrative by millennia, describes a cataclysmic flood orchestrated by Enlil, who, driven by his exasperation, decided to wipe out humanity entirely. We were, after all, his creation, and he felt he had the right to unmake us. But Enki, our original engineer, the one who blended the quote 36 and the quote 37, had a different perspective. He had a vested interest in his creation. Perhaps he saw humanity not just as a labour force, but as something more, something with potential. Or perhaps, being the master craftsman, he simply couldn't stand to see his ingenious work destroyed. Whatever his true motivation, Enki secretly intervened. He warned a righteous man, Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah figure, to build an ark, to save his family and the seeds of all living things. The Great Flood, described with terrifying detail in the tablets, was a devastating event. It swept across the land, wiping out almost all life. When the waters finally receded, Enlil was furious to discover that humanity had survived. His anger, however, was eventually placated by the other Anunnaki, who recognized the value of humanity, not just for labor, but for the offerings and sustenance we provided to them. It was a stark reminder of our fragility, but also of our resilience and Enki's quiet defiance. This episode marks a pivotal moment. It highlights the deeply ungodlike qualities of the Anunnaki. These were not omnipotent, omniscient beings. They had disagreements, jealousies, and very human-like frustrations. They made plans, and those plans could be thwarted. They needed sustenance, and humanity provided it. The flood narrative underscores their physical presence and their direct, often contentious involvement in human affairs. After the flood, humanity was given another chance. The Anunnaki, it seems, recognized that total annihilation was not in their best interest. They needed us. But the relationship continued to evolve. We were still their servants, but now we were also their stewards, entrusted with the continuity of life on Earth. The Anunnaki continued to guide, to rule through human kings, but a sense of their eventual withdrawal began to permeate the narratives. Why would they leave? The texts are not entirely explicit, but several theories emerge. Perhaps their home planet's crisis was finally averted and the need for gold lessened. Perhaps the Earth's environment or its resources were no longer as vital to them. Or perhaps, and this is truly thought-provoking, humanity had served its purpose, not just as a labour force, but as a fledgling civilization capable of managing itself, albeit under their lingering influence. The Anunnaki didn't vanish overnight. Their departure was gradual, marked by the handing over of responsibilities, the establishment of enduring institutions, and the promise of their return. They left behind not just the cities and the knowledge, but also the elaborate mythologies that enshrined their stories, their deeds, and their commands. These were not just tales. They were the historical records of our origins, meticulously preserved on clay tablets, waiting for brilliant minds like Henry Rawlinson to crack their code millennia later. So, what are we left with? A history where our progenitors were not ethereal deities but physical beings who descended from the heavens, seeking resources. Beings who engineered us for labor, yet paradoxically gifted us the very foundations of civilization. Beings who squabbled, made mistakes, and even tried to destroy us, only to be swayed by one of their own. The Anunnaki left behind a world shaped by their presence, a humanity forever marked by their genetic imprint and their teachings. But they also left a gaping void, a profound question that echoes through time. If we were created for a specific purpose, what happens when that purpose is fulfilled, or when our creators depart? What does it mean for our destiny, our free will, our very identity, to know that our origins might be far more engineered than divine? The truth, as etched in these ancient texts, suggests that the gods of Sumer were not gods in the traditional sense, but rather an advanced, powerful, and often ruthless extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional ruling class. They were here for a reason. They accomplished their goals, and then they left their legacy and their mystery behind. This is where the story gets even more complex and perhaps more urgent. If the Anunnaki were real, if they were our creators and our early teachers, what does that imply about the nature of our reality, our history, and our future? And if they were indeed those who from heaven to earth came, could they one day return? This is the question that continues to haunt us, prompting us to look beyond the conventional narratives and truly consider the truth you haven't heard. Next, we'll explore the enduring evidence of their presence and the implications for humanity's future. We've journeyed deep into the heart of ancient Sumer, peeling back layers of myth to reveal a narrative that challenges everything we thought we knew about our origins. We've explored the Anunnaki's arrival, their insatiable need for resources, their creation of humanity, and their ultimate enigmatic departure. But now, we arrive at the pivotal question: how do we know any of this? How do we, in the 21st century, reconstruct such a radical, paradigm-shifting history from a dusty ancient land? This is where the true detective work begins, where the whispers of antiquity transform into a resounding chorus, thanks to the tireless efforts of brilliant minds who literally began to crack the code of forgotten civilizations. We're talking about the decipherment of cuneiform, that intricate wedge-shaped writing etched into clay tablets, the very language of the Anunnaki's scribes. Imagine, if you will, the early 19th century. European explorers and archaeologists are fanning out across the Middle East, driven by curiosity, imperial ambition, and a thirst for lost knowledge. They dig into the tells, those artificial mounds formed by centuries of human habitation that dot the landscape of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. What they find is astonishing. Vast libraries of clay tablets, some still perfectly preserved, others fragmented, all covered in a script no living soul could read. For centuries these tablets were silent, their stories locked away, waiting. Then came a pivotal moment, a true intellectual earthquake. The key to unlocking this ancient world lay not just in the ruins of Sumer, but in the towering cliffs of Behistun, Iran. Here, high above a caravan route, a monumental inscription was carved into the rock face by order of Darius the Great of Persia around 500 BCE. It told the story of his triumphs, written in 3 different cuneiform languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Enter Henry Rawlinson, a British Army officer, adventurer, and self-taught linguist of extraordinary talent. In the 1830s and 40s, Rawlinson risked life and limb, scaling perilous cliffs to copy the Behistun inscription. He knew Old Persian, and meticulously, painstakingly, he began to decipher the cuneiform script. It was a monumental task, akin to solving the most complex puzzle imaginable without ever having seen a complete picture. He was working in a world without the internet, without instant communication, relying on sheer intellect and perseverance. By 1857, Rawlinson and his contemporaries, like Edward Hincks, Julius Oppert, and William Henry Fox Talbot, had made enough progress to confidently translate cuneiform. The British Museum put them to the test. They gave each scholar an identical, previously untranslated clay cylinder containing the annals of the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser. When their translations were compared, they were found to be in remarkable agreement. The code was broken. The voices of ancient Mesopotamia could finally speak again. And what did they say? That's where our journey gets genuinely interesting, and where the truth you haven't heard truly begins to unfold. Because as scholars began to translate the hundreds of thousands of tablets unearthed from cities like Nineveh, Nippur, and Uruk, they didn't just find mundane administrative records or royal decrees. They found epic poems, creation myths, flood narratives, and detailed descriptions of beings they called the Anunnaki. These texts, dating back thousands of years, some to the very dawn of written history predating even the Old Testament, presented a version of events that was utterly baffling to the Victorian world. Here were gods who weren't ethereal, omnipotent, or transcendent. Instead, they were depicted as physical, corporeal beings who arrived on Earth. They needed shelter. They needed sustenance. They worked. They ate. They slept. They fought. And they had a very clear, very material purpose for being here: resource extraction, specifically gold. Think about this for a second. The oldest known written records of humanity describe not an abstract spiritual creation by an unseen deity, but a very hands-on, almost industrial-scale project by a group of powerful, yet clearly physical beings. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, and the Atrahasis epic, which details the creation of humanity and the Great Flood, are not vague allegories. They are surprisingly detailed accounts of events that, when stripped of the God label, read like a historical record of an advanced, extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional ruling class. The paradox is striking. These beings are called gods, Dinga in Sumerian, which simply means bright ones or those who came from the sky. Yet their actions are profoundly ungodlike in the traditional sense. They are depicted with a clear hierarchy: Anu in the heavens, Enlil ruling the earth and air, Enki overseeing the waters and wisdom. But beneath them, the Igigi, the junior Anunnaki, are described as labouring in the mines and digging irrigation canals, growing weary, grumbling, and eventually rebelling against their back-breaking work. Does this sound like the behavior of all-powerful deities who merely speak things into existence? Or does it sound like a workforce, albeit an advanced one, tasked with a difficult and demanding job? The ancient texts describe their houses and temples not as places of spiritual worship for an invisible presence, but as physical dwellings and operational centers, often built atop immense ziggurats that functioned as landing platforms or communication hubs. The descriptions of their heavenly chariots or skyboats could easily be interpreted as advanced spacecraft, not mythical constructs. This is where the alien hypothesis, often dismissed by mainstream academia as fringe theory, gains its most compelling ground. If we choose to read these ancient texts literally, as historical accounts rather than purely mythological allegories, the narrative shifts dramatically. We are no longer talking about intangible gods, but about visitors from another world, or perhaps another dimension, who possess technology far beyond our own. Consider the details. The Anunnaki needed gold, a resource vital for something on their home planet or for their technology. This implies a material dependency, a biological or technological requirement that grounds them firmly in the physical realm. Their genetic engineering project to create humanity, the Lulu Amelu, or primitive worker, was a pragmatic solution to a labor crisis. They didn't create us out of divine love or a desire for worship. They created us out of necessity to alleviate their burden. The quote 51 mixed with quote 52 isn't a poetic metaphor for divine spark. It sounds eerily like genetic material combined with terrestrial elements. The very fact that they taught humanity advanced concepts, agriculture, metallurgy, mathematics, writing, and the construction of cities suggests not just divine benevolence, but a strategic investment in their workforce. A more intelligent, organized workforce is a more efficient and productive one. They laid the foundations of civilization, yes, but perhaps not as an act of pure charity, but as a means to an end, to ensure the smooth operation of their earthly enterprise. The internal conflicts among the Anunnaki, their jealousies, their rivalries, Enlil's rage, Enki's cunning, these are profoundly human, or rather, ungodlike emotions. They suggest beings with complex social structures, political maneuvering, and individual personalities, not monolithic divine entities. Their decisions, like Enlil's attempt to wipe out humanity with the Great Flood, were driven by frustration and practical concerns. Humanity was too noisy, too numerous, not by abstract moral judgments. And Enki's intervention to save humanity was also practical. He saw value in his creation, a workforce that still served a purpose. So, when we look at the deciphered cuneiform tablets, the undeniable records of the Sumerians themselves, we are faced with a stark choice. Do we interpret these accounts through the lens of traditional religious mythology, dismissing the physical descriptions and pragmatic actions as mere allegories for spiritual truths? Or do we take the ancient scribes at their word, accepting that those who from heaven to earth came were indeed physical beings who came here for a purpose, engineered our species and shaped our early civilization? The implications of the latter are staggering. They challenge not only our religious doctrines, but also the very foundations of evolutionary biology and human history as taught in our schools. They suggest that the missing link in human evolution might not be missing at all, but rather a deliberate intervention. They paint a picture of humanity as a designed species created with a specific purpose rather than the product of blind natural selection. This is the beating heart of the Anunnaki mystery. It's not about believing in fanciful tales. It's about rigorously examining the oldest surviving records of humanity and asking, what if they were telling us the literal truth? What if the gods of antiquity were not gods at all, but something far more tangible, far more scientific, and far more unsettling to our modern worldview? The truth you haven't heard is etched in clay, waiting for us to shed our preconceptions and truly listen. And as we move forward, we must confront the evidence, weigh the interpretations, and decide for ourselves what these ancient voices are truly telling us about our past, and perhaps about our future. Because if they came once, what prevents them from returning? Welcome back, fellow seekers of truth, to Teskek, quote 56. We've journeyed through the dust-laden plains of ancient Sumer, sifted through the broken shards of cuneiform, and stood witness to a narrative that shatters our most fundamental assumptions about human origins. We left off with the profound realization that if we take the Sumerian texts literally, not as allegory, not as myth, but as historical accounts, then humanity is not merely a product of blind evolution, nor the unique creation of an ethereal, all-powerful deity. Instead, we are an engineered species, a designed workforce, crafted by beings who came from the stars. Now this is where the conventional understanding of Gasest, quote 57, begins to unravel, and the quote 58 truly starts to emerge. Think about this for a second. If the Anunnaki were physical beings who arrived on Earth, who needed resources, who toiled and tired, who ate and drank, who fought amongst themselves, and who had a very concrete purpose for our creation, how can we still call them, quote 59, in the way most modern religions define the term? The paradox is glaring, isn't it? We're talking about beings who required housing, who needed to eat the food grown by the very humans they created, who experienced fatigue, frustration, and even hunger. Their need for gold, their internal power struggles between figures like Enlil and Enki, their very physical presence in cities like Eridu and Nippur. These are not the attributes of an omnipresent, omnipotent, ethereal divine being. They are the characteristics of an advanced, powerful, yet ultimately physical species. So, why the persistent label of gods? We propose that the term God was a human interpretation, a label born out of awe, fear, and a profound lack of understanding. Imagine encountering beings with technology so far beyond your comprehension that it would appear as magic. Their flying craft, their ability to manipulate genetics, their advanced knowledge of metallurgy and astronomy. To the early Sumerians, these were not scientific achievements, they were divine powers. When these beings commanded the very forces of nature, when they brought forth life or unleashed destruction, how else could they be perceived but as gods? The Sumerians, in their ancient wisdom, understood these beings as their creators and rulers. They weren't worshipping an abstract concept. They were interacting with a very real, very present ruling class. Their kings were merely intermediaries, chosen to communicate with these powerful, quote 62. Their ziggurats were not just temples, but likely landing platforms or administrative centers for these otherworldly visitors. The offerings they presented weren't just spiritual gestures, they were tribute, a form of taxation, a necessary sustenance for their overlords. But over millennia, as the Anunnaki gradually withdrew, as their direct presence faded into memory, the narrative began to shift. Later cultures, inheriting fragments of these stories, stripped away the physical concrete details. The advanced technology became miracles. The resource extraction became divine purpose. The physical beings became abstract spirits. The powerful rulers became omnipotent deities. This is the crucial point. The truth you haven't heard that lies beneath layers of religious dogma and academic dismissal. The original accounts describe something far more tangible, far more scientific than the gods we've been taught to revere. This reinterpretation, this gradual etherealization of the Anunnaki, served various purposes. It allowed for the consolidation of power in religious institutions, who could claim exclusive access to these now distant deities. It simplified a complex, uncomfortable history into easily digestible myths. And perhaps most significantly, it distanced humanity from the unsettling truth of its own engineered genesis. Now let's confront the implications of this engineered origin for humanity itself. If we were created as a primitive worker, the Lulu Amelu, what does that say about our identity, our essence, our very free will? Were we simply tools, biological robots designed for a specific task? The texts tell us that Enki and Ninmah mixed. Quote 67 with the quote 68. This quote 69 likely refers to the indigenous hominid species present on Earth, and the quote 70 points to the genetic material of an Anunnaki, specifically the sacrificed Igigi, Wiilu. This wasn't some mystical ritual. It was a genetic manipulation, an accelerated evolution, a hybridization event. This challenges the very core of our self-perception. For centuries we have grappled with the question of our unique place in the cosmos, our divine spark, our inherent value. But if our origins lie in a laboratory, however ancient, however alien, then our divine spark might simply be the genetic imprint of our creators. Does this diminish us? Or does it give us a profound, almost cosmic significance? We are, in a very real sense, made in the image of our creators, not in a spiritual sense, but in a genetic, biological one. The notion of free will becomes particularly complex here. Were we programmed with a subservient nature, destined to toil? The Sumerian texts depict humanity as initially mute, requiring further intervention to gain speech and understanding. This suggests a gradual refinement of the human prototype. But over time, humanity rapidly multiplied, developed its own cultures, and even, as Enlil observed with frustration, became quite noisy. We demonstrated an adaptability and a burgeoning consciousness that perhaps exceeded the Anunnaki's initial design parameters. Did we evolve beyond our intended programming? Did the S.73 grant us an inherent potential for creativity and self-determination that even our creators hadn't fully anticipated? This is the beating heart of the mystery, the question that genuinely rattles the foundations of our understanding. And what of the Anunnaki's departure? The texts suggest a gradual withdrawal, not an abrupt abandonment. They left behind their knowledge, their institutions, their blueprint for civilization. They established human kings to maintain order and act as their representatives. But why did they leave? Was their mission accomplished? Had the gold requirements for their homeworld been met? Had the conditions on their own planet improved, making their continued presence on Earth unnecessary? Or did internal conflicts and the growing complexity of managing a rapidly multiplying human population simply make their prolonged stay untenable? The answer remains shrouded in the mists of time, but the legacy of their departure is clear, an enduring human memory etched into clay tablets of, quote, 74. This phrase, repeated across countless ancient cultures in various forms, carries with it an implicit expectation, a return. It's not just a memory, it's a prophecy, a lingering hope, or perhaps a deep-seated apprehension. Imagine for a moment if they were to return today. How would our modern world react to the reappearance of these ancient, quote 75, now understood as advanced extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings? Would it be a moment of global enlightenment, confirming centuries of whispered truths? Or would it unleash chaos, shattering religious doctrines and scientific paradigms alike? Would they see us as their successful creation, a thriving species that has far surpassed its initial purpose? Or would they see us as a wayward experiment in need of correction, or perhaps, once again, a new directive? This isn't just ancient history, friends. This is a living mystery that directly impacts our understanding of who we are, where we come from, and where we might be headed. The Sumerian accounts offer an alternative Genesis story, one that doesn't necessarily negate evolution, but rather suggests a directed intervention, a genetic leap orchestrated by an advanced intelligence. It challenges us to look beyond conventional narratives and consider the radical possibility that our origins are far more complex and far more extraordinary than we have ever dared to imagine. As we continue our exploration, we'll delve deeper into the implications of this truth, examining the echoes of the Anunnaki narrative in other ancient cultures, and considering what it truly means to be human in a universe potentially teeming with life, and perhaps with our own creators. The journey is far from over, and the questions only grow more profound. Stay with us, because the truth you haven't heard is still unfolding. We've journeyed through the astounding claims of ancient Sumerian texts, peeling back layers of myth to reveal something profoundly different from the ethereal deities we've been taught to expect. We've witnessed the Anunnaki's arrival, their grueling labour, the desperate creation of humanity, and the subsequent tumultuous relationship marked by both nurturing and attempted annihilation. We've seen them as physical, emotional beings, driven by tangible needs, not abstract divine whims. But here's where the narrative takes another fascinating turn, one that challenges the very foundations of our understanding of history and our place within it, the Anunnaki's departure. If these beings were indeed the architects of our earliest civilizations, the literal gods who walked among us, why did they leave? And what did that withdrawal truly mean for the nascent human race they had so meticulously engineered? The ancient texts, those invaluable clay tablets we've discussed, don't describe a sudden cataclysmic vanishing act. No, the story they tell is far more nuanced, a gradual retreat, a strategic disengagement that leaves us with more questions than answers. Think about this for a second. If you've invested so much in a project, if you've created a species, built cities, and established entire systems of governance and worship, why simply pack up and go? The truth, as always, is far more complex than simple abandonment. What we uncover in the uniform is a transition, a slow fading of direct presence. The Anunnaki didn't just vanish. They ascended, not necessarily to a spiritual plane, but often back to their celestial, quote 77, or perhaps to a higher, less direct level of oversight. We see a shift from direct physical interaction, where Enlil might walk through Nippur, or Enki might advise the king of Eridu, to a more symbolic, mediated relationship. Priests became the primary intermediaries, temple rituals intensified, and the grand ziggurats, those towering stairways to heaven, became vital conduits for communication, not merely places of worship. They were, in essence, the original data centers, the communication hubs where the human workforce could interface with their distant overseers. This change in dynamic is crucial. It's not that the Anunnaki suddenly ceased to exist in the Sumerian consciousness. Far from it. Their influence, their laws, their very presence became ingrained in the fabric of society, but their physical manifestation became less common. We find accounts of Anunnaki, quote 78, taking place in the heavens, their decrees relayed to humanity through dreams, omens, or the pronouncements of high priests. This is where the line between quote 79 and quote 80 blurs most dramatically. A god is omnipresent. An alien ruler, even an advanced one, might have logistical reasons for a strategic withdrawal. So, what was the nature of this withdrawal? Was it a mission accomplished? Were the required resources, that precious gold, finally secured? Or did their internal conflicts, the ongoing tension between Enlil's stern authority and Enki's more benevolent, often rebellious wisdom, reach a point where direct earthly involvement became untenable? The texts offer tantalizing glimpses but no definitive, universally agreed upon answer. What we do see, however, is a clear pattern. As humanity grew in number and capability, the Anunnaki's direct hand began to recede, much like a parent gradually allowing their child more independence, albeit with a watchful eye. But they didn't leave us empty-handed. Oh no, far from it. What they bequeathed to humanity was nothing short of the complete blueprint for civilization itself. We're not just talking about agriculture or metallurgy anymore. We're talking about the very structures that define organized human society. Kingship. The concept of a ruler chosen by the Sen's quote 81 to govern humanity, to maintain order, and to act as a direct intermediary. This wasn't a human invention, it was an Anunnaki decree. The Sumerian king list, for instance, meticulously records these early rulers, often stating explicitly that kingship descended from heaven. This wasn't merely a political system, it was a divine mandate, ensuring that even in their absence the chain of command, the Anunnaki's established order, remained firmly in place. Law and justice. The great legal codes of Mesopotamia, like the famous Code of Hammurabi, often begin with invocations to the gods, claiming divine inspiration. This reflects an earlier, deeper tradition where the Anunnaki themselves were the ultimate lawgivers, establishing the principles of justice and societal harmony. They laid the groundwork for complex legal systems, ensuring that their engineered workforce functioned efficiently and predictably. Astronomy and mathematics. The advanced knowledge of the Sumerians in these fields, their sophisticated calendrical systems, their sexagesimal base 60 numbering system, these weren't gradual human discoveries. The texts suggest they were taught, passed down directly from the Anunnaki. It's as if a highly advanced civilization provided a starter kit for a developing species, giving them the tools to manage their world, track time, and even map the heavens, perhaps to better understand the paths of their departed creators. Religion and ritual. The elaborate temple complexes, the specific offerings, the intricate rituals. These weren't just spontaneous acts of human devotion. They were prescribed. They were a system designed to maintain the flow of energy, resources, or even communication between humanity and the Anunnaki. The offerings of food, drink, and goods weren't necessarily for ethereal spirits, but perhaps for the physical sustenance of beings who, even if distant, still had needs. It was a contractual agreement, a quid pro quo. Humanity provided sustenance and worship, and the Anunnaki in turn provided protection, order, and continued knowledge. This is where it gets genuinely interesting, and perhaps a little unsettling. If humanity was engineered for a purpose, to be a workforce, then the civilization bestowed upon us was, in many ways, an extension of that purpose. It wasn't just about survival, it was about creating a self-sustaining system that could continue to serve its original creators, even in their physical absence. The institutions they left behind ensured that humanity remained organized, productive, and focused on maintaining the established order. The paradox here is striking. The Gandas, quote 83, who needed gold, who fought among themselves, who exhibited all too human emotions, eventually withdrew. But their withdrawal wasn't an abdication of power. It was a strategic repositioning. They left behind a world structured in their image, a society designed to perpetuate their legacy, and, perhaps, to await their return. This brings us to one of the most compelling and often whispered aspects of the Anunnaki mystery, the concept of the Watchers. While the Anunnaki may have retreated from direct daily interaction, many interpretations of the text suggest they didn't entirely vanish. Instead, they became observers, monitoring humanity's progress from a distance, perhaps from their celestial abodes, or even from hidden enclaves on Earth. The idea that we are still, in some sense, under observation, that our development is being tracked by our creators, adds a layer of profound significance to our history. It shifts the question from Gyasest, quote 85, to quote 86. And what about their return? Many ancient traditions, not just Sumerian, speak of a cyclical return of the gods, a time when the heavens will once again open. Could these be echoes of a future event, a planned reappearance of the Anunnaki when conditions are ripe, or when humanity has reached a certain stage of development, or perhaps deviation? The quote 87 isn't just about how we were created, but why we were left and what that implies for our future. This engineered genesis, this carefully constructed civilization, leaves us with a fundamental question about the human condition. If we were designed, if our very purpose was initially defined by an external alien intelligence, what does that mean for our free will, for our spiritual aspirations, for our inherent drive to explore, to create, to question? Are these innate qualities, or are they echoes of the Anunnaki's own nature, imprinted upon us during our creation? We're left contemplating a profound legacy, a meticulously crafted world, a species born of necessity, and a lingering sense of an unfinished story. The Anunnaki's departure wasn't an end, it was a transition, a new phase in the grand experiment. And as we continue to crack the codes of the past, we realize that the biggest questions aren't just about ancient history, but about our own identity, our purpose, and the possibility that the architects of our world might not be as far away as we think. The stage was set, the play began, and the original directors simply moved to the back row, perhaps waiting for their cue to return. The mystery, dear friends, only deepens from here. Welcome back, fellow truth seekers, to Dreamy Mystery, where we peel back the layers of history to reveal the truths you haven't heard. We've journeyed through ancient Sumer, deciphered the whispers of cuneiform, and stared into the eyes of beings described as gods, yet who behaved in profoundly ungodlike ways. We've seen them arrive, toil, fight, and even engineer humanity from the very dust of this planet, all for a tangible material purpose. But here's the paradox that truly makes the foundations of conventional history tremble. If these Anunnaki were so powerful, so invested in their creation, so dependent on humanity for their golden ambitions, why did they seemingly leave? This isn't a story of divine rapture or sudden disappearance. No, the ancient texts paint a far more nuanced, far more strategic picture of what we call the Great Withdrawal. Think about it for a moment. These beings, with their advanced knowledge of metallurgy, engineering, and even genetic manipulation, didn't just vanish into thin air. They didn't pack up their interstellar bags and abandon their meticulously crafted experiment. Instead, what the Sumerian tablets describe is a gradual, almost imperceptible fading from direct interaction, a strategic retreat that left behind not a vacuum, but a meticulously structured world designed to perpetuate their legacy. Their departure, we contend, was not an abandonment, but a transition. Perhaps their primary objective, the extraction of that vital gold, reached a point of critical mass, or the needs of their homeworld shifted, or perhaps, and this is where it gets genuinely unsettling, humanity had matured enough to manage the system they had put in place, becoming self-sustaining within the parameters they had established. The Anunnaki had built the machine. Now they simply needed to ensure it ran smoothly without their constant direct oversight. This is where the role of the kings, the priests, and those towering ziggurats becomes profoundly significant. These were not merely religious figures or architectural marvels. They were the conduits, the intermediaries, the very sinews of the Anunnaki's enduring influence. The kings, chosen and often quote 90 by these quote 91, were presented to humanity as shepherds, guiding the flock according to divine decree. But whose decree? The stern pronouncements of Enlil, the cunning wisdom of Enki. These were not abstract divine laws, but specific directives, political strategies, and social engineering principles designed to maintain order, productivity, and the continued flow of resources, whether gold, labour, or even reverence, back to their unseen masters. Imagine a king in ancient Uruk, standing atop the ziggurat, addressing his people. He speaks of the will of the gods, of the blessings bestowed upon them. But what if those blessings were, in reality, carefully calibrated instructions? Instructions on irrigation techniques to maximize agricultural output, on legal codes to ensure a stable workforce, on military strategies to protect valuable territories. The priests, meanwhile, became the interpreters of this divine will, translating complex Anunnaki directives into accessible rituals and moral codes, embedding the Anunnaki narrative deep within the human psyche. They were the custodians of knowledge, yes, but also the gatekeepers of a carefully curated truth. And the ziggurats? We've often viewed them as temples, places of worship. But what if their primary function was far more pragmatic, far more technological? With their towering heights and specific alignments, could they have served as communication hubs, relay stations for transmissions between the Anunnaki, Whether they were orbiting the Earth, residing in hidden enclaves, or even communicating from their distant homeworld, the air would have been thick with the smell of clay and reeds. Yes, but perhaps also with a hum of unseen energy, a silent conversation between our creators and their chosen representatives on Earth. This explains their meticulous construction, their precise orientation, and their consistent presence in every major Sumerian city. They weren't just monuments, they were part of a vast interconnected network. Now, let's turn our gaze inward, to the very core of what it means to be human in this narrative. If humanity was, as the texts suggest, an engineered species, a Lulu Amelu, a primitive worker created from clay and the blood of a god, what does that truly say about our free will? About our identity? Are we merely sophisticated biological machines, programmed with certain predispositions, certain drives, certain inherent conflicts? This is where the mystery deepens, where the implications become truly profound. The Anunnaki needed a workforce. They needed beings strong enough to toil, intelligent enough to follow instructions, yet docile enough to be controlled. But the blood of a god, that sacred, potent ingredient, what did it truly impart? Was it merely a genetic boost for physical stamina, or did it carry something more, a spark of consciousness, a latent capacity for innovation, for art, for philosophy, for rebellion? The paradox is this: they created us for labour, yet we developed complex societies, intricate languages, breathtaking art, and profound spiritual beliefs that often transcended their original utilitarian design. Was this an unforeseen consequence of their genetic tinkering, or was it a deliberate, calculated risk? Did Enki, the Lord of Wisdom, perhaps embed within us a seed of his own cunning, his own capacity for independent thought, knowing that a truly advanced workforce would eventually evolve beyond mere servitude? This is the heart of our human dilemma, the beating pulse of our engineered genesis. Are we truly free, or are we living out a sophisticated program, a grand experiment whose parameters were set millennia ago? This brings us to one of the most intriguing and often whispered concepts in ancient lore: the Watchers. Even after their direct presence faded, the Anunnaki didn't simply abandon their creation. Ancient traditions, not just Sumerian but echoing across various cultures, speak of beings who remained, observing, monitoring, perhaps even guiding humanity from the shadows. These, says Stern Quote 96, are not mere mythological figures. They represent a persistent, albeit unseen, hand in human affairs. Why watch? To ensure the experiment continues on its intended trajectory, to protect their investment in humanity, to safeguard the planet's resources, perhaps still vital to them, even if extracted by proxy? Or is it something more sinister, a long-term strategic play, a preparation for a potential return? These Watchers, often described as beings of immense knowledge and power, would have witnessed humanity's triumphs and our devastating failures. They would have seen our burgeoning civilizations, our relentless wars, our technological leaps, and our philosophical awakenings. Every innovation, every conflict, every societal shift could be seen as data points in their ongoing assessment of humanity. Are we developing too fast? Too slow? Are we straying too far from the original blueprint? Or are we fulfilling a deeper, hidden purpose? The possibility of their return is not just a fringe theory. It's an inherent part of the narrative woven into the fabric of these ancient texts and traditions. If they came once, driven by specific needs and objectives. What prevents them from returning when those needs resurface, or when humanity reaches a certain critical threshold? The idea isn't that they will descend from the heavens in chariots of fire to simply reclaim their throne. No, the truth you haven't heard is far more subtle, far more strategic. Their return might not be a dramatic overt invasion, but a re-engagement, a reassertion of influence in a world they meticulously shaped. Consider our own modern world, the global crises, the rapid advancements in genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and space exploration. Are these developments merely the natural progression of human ingenuity, or are they perhaps subtly guided? Are we, unknowingly, building the very infrastructure, developing the very technologies that would facilitate their re-entry and re-establishment of direct contact or even control? This isn't about fear. It's about critical inquiry, about challenging the comforting narratives we've been told. If our origins are not as simple as we've been led to believe, if our very essence was engineered, then the implications for our future are staggering. What happens when the engineers decide to check on their project? What happens when the watchers decide it's time to intervene, to course correct, or to reveal themselves once more? The truth is, the Anunnaki may never have truly left. They may simply have shifted their vantage point, moving from direct interaction to a more subtle, pervasive form of guidance and observation. And the question that haunts us, that should haunt all of us who seek the truth, is this: are we, humanity, truly ready for the full revelation of our origins? Are we ready to confront the possibility that our destiny has been, and perhaps still is, intertwined with the enigmatic beings who... Quote 97. The answers, my friends, lie not just in ancient clay tablets, but in the very fabric of our present and the unfolding tapestry of our future. And that is a mystery we will continue to unravel together. The Great Withdrawal. It sounds like a definitive end, doesn't it? As if our Anunnaki overseers simply packed their bags, boarded their sky chariots, and vanished into the cosmos, leaving humanity to fend for itself. But here's where the narrative, as etched into those ancient clay tablets, takes another fascinating, almost chilling turn. It wasn't an abandonment in the traditional sense, but a strategic repositioning, a shift from direct governance to a more subtle, pervasive form of influence. Think of it this way. A master craftsman doesn't necessarily abandon his workshop after creating a complex machine. He might step back, observe its function, and ensure it continues to operate according to his design, perhaps even preparing for future adjustments or improvements. This is precisely the nuanced picture that emerges from the Sumerian accounts. The Anunnaki didn't disappear. They became the... Quote 98. What does it mean to be a watcher? It suggests an ongoing observation, a continued interest in their creation. We find echoes of this concept not just in the foundational Sumerian texts, but even in later traditions like the enigmatic. Quote 90 Sinal, mentioned in the Book of Enoch, beings who descended to Earth and interacted with humanity. While the specifics differ, the underlying theme of powerful non-human entities observing, and at times interfering with, human affairs remains strikingly consistent across disparate ancient narratives. Imagine the ancient world in the wake of the Great Withdrawal. The ziggurats, those massive stepped temples that pierced the Mesopotamian sky, once served as direct points of contact, the earthly homes of the Anunnaki. Now they transform. They become observation posts, communication hubs, symbolic stairways to the heavens where the Anunnaki were now presumed to reside. The kings and priests, once direct intermediaries, now become interpreters of divine will, maintaining the elaborate rituals and sacrifices designed to appease these unseen yet ever-present beings. This shift creates a profound psychological impact on humanity. No longer under the direct gaze of a physical, albeit powerful master, we are now under the eternal gaze of the divine. The Anunnaki, no longer seen digging canals or demanding tribute in person, ascend to a truly godlike status in the human psyche. Their physical absence paradoxically solidifies their spiritual presence. The fear of divine retribution for misdeeds, the hope for divine favor through worship. These concepts become deeply ingrained, forming the bedrock of human morality and religious practice. Consider the implications for our understanding of free will. If humanity was engineered for a purpose, to serve, to labor, to sustain the Anunnaki presence, then how much of our subsequent development was truly organic, and how much was guided, even subtly, by the Watchers? Did they merely observe, or did they subtly nudge through omens, dreams, or even direct, albeit discreet, interventions with their chosen intermediaries? The texts are tantalizingly ambiguous, painting a picture of a world where the lines between divine inspiration and extraterrestrial manipulation blur into oblivion. This ongoing influence extends far beyond mere observation. The blueprint for civilization, meticulously laid out by Enki and his cohorts, continued to shape human societies for millennia. The concept of kingship, for instance, didn't simply fade away. It became sanctified, the king's authority often legitimized by claiming direct lineage or divine appointment from the very, quote, $100 who had once ruled. Laws, social hierarchies, agricultural practices, even the structure of our earlier cities, all bore the indelible stamp of Anunnaki design. We were, in essence, operating on an inherited operating system, a legacy of creation designed to perpetuate their influence, even in their physical absence. But the most compelling, and perhaps most unsettling aspect of this post-withdrawal narrative isn't just the ongoing observation or the enduring blueprint, it's the persistent, almost universal thread woven into countless ancient mythologies, the prophesied return. Across cultures and civilizations, from the Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl to the Zoroastrian Saoshyant to the Christian Messiah, we find stories of a powerful, benevolent, or sometimes wrathful divine figure who departed but is destined to return. In the context of the Anunnaki narrative, this takes on an entirely different, more concrete dimension. These aren't just vague spiritual hopes. These are prophecies rooted in the very beings who walked among us, who engineered our existence. Where do these prophecies originate? They are implicit in the cyclical nature of many ancient cosmologies, where ages begin and end, and divine interventions recur. If the Anunnaki arrived, established order, and then withdrew, the logical progression in these ancient minds would be a re-engagement. Some interpretations of Sumerian and Akkadian texts hint at a celestial cycle, a grand orbital period often associated with the Anunnaki's home planet, Nibiru, which would bring them back into closer proximity to Earth. This isn't just a spiritual return. It's a physical one, tied to astronomical events. Think about this for a second. If humanity was created to serve a specific purpose, and that purpose was to extract resources or maintain a presence for a technologically advanced civilization, would they truly abandon their investment? Or would they simply initiate a long-term project designed to mature and develop under their distant supervision, ready for a future re-engagement? The prophesied return, then, isn't just a religious hope. It's potentially a scheduled event, a planned reactivation of their original project. The nature of this return, however, remains shrouded in profound ambiguity. Will it be a benevolent re-establishment of contact, a reunion with our creators who return to guide us to a new era of enlightenment? Or will it be a more demanding reassertion of control, a reclamation of their property, perhaps even a judgment on humanity's stewardship of the planet they engineered for us? The ancient texts offer tantalizing glimpses, but no definitive answers, leaving us to grapple with the full spectrum of possibilities. This is where the ancient narrative truly collides with modern anxieties and fascinations. The enduring human fascination with extraterrestrial contact, with global cataclysms, with secret societies, with a coming disclosure. Do these modern narratives not echo the ancient prophecies of a returning power? Are we, perhaps subconsciously, preparing for a re-engagement with our original architects? The idea that our gods were advanced beings who left us with a blueprint for civilization and a promise of return resonates deeply with contemporary discussions about alien visitation and humanity's place in the cosmos. If they were truly alien beings, driven by resource needs and geopolitical ambitions on a cosmic scale, then their return would not be a theological event, but a geopolitical one of unprecedented magnitude. It would shatter our understanding of history, religion, and our very identity. It would force us to confront the truth of our engineered genesis, the implications of a species created not by divine whim, but by intelligent design for a specific functional purpose. The paradox deepens here, doesn't it? These same beings who engineered our existence, who gifted us civilization, also inflicted upon us the burden of labor and the fear of their wrath. Their return, then, could be either salvation or subjugation. It presents humanity with the ultimate existential question. If our creators return, what will they expect of us? What will they reveal about our true nature, our hidden potentials, and the ultimate destiny they envisioned for their greatest experiment? The truth you haven't heard, the one whispered across millennia in the silence of cuneiform tablets, is that the story of the Anunnaki isn't over. It's a saga with an unfinished final chapter, a prophecy awaiting its fulfillment. And as we continue to unravel these ancient narratives, we are forced to confront the possibility that the very foundations of our world and our future may hinge on the reappearance of the beings who first sparked the flame of human consciousness. The question isn't just if they return, but when, and what that moment will mean for every one of us. We've explored the Anunnaki's departure, their great withdrawal, a strategic disengagement that left humanity to flourish, or so it seemed. But that's only half the story, isn't it? Because etched into the very fabric of ancient thought, across continents and cultures, is a chilling counter-narrative, the prophecy of their return. This isn't just a hopeful whisper or a vague spiritual aspiration. It's a recurring motif, a thread woven through countless ancient tapestries, speaking not of a benevolent second coming, but of a calculated reappearance. Think about this for a second. If the Anunnaki were indeed physical beings, driven by concrete needs and complex politics. If they engineered us for a purpose, why would their story simply end with their retreat? It makes no sense. The meticulous planning, the establishment of sophisticated societal structures, the very genetic imprint they left within us, it all points to a long-term strategy, a future engagement. Their withdrawal wasn't an abandonment. It was perhaps a pause, a period of observation, a preparation. The Sumerian texts, those venerable clay tablets that have already revealed so much, are surprisingly explicit. They speak of celestial cycles, of specific alignments, of a time when the gods will once again descend from the heavens. This isn't just about Sumer, though. We find echoes of this narrative in Mesoamerican calendars, in Hindu yugas, in the prophecies of indigenous cultures across the globe. It's a truly global phenomenon, this anticipation of a return, and it's a synchronicity that demands our attention. And here, friends, is where the story takes a truly cosmic turn. For many, this prophesied return is inextricably linked to the enigmatic 12th planet, a celestial body known to the Sumerians as Nibiru. Now, before you dismiss this as pure science fiction, let's unpack what the ancient texts actually describe. They depict Nibiru not as a distant, abstract star, but as a fully inhabited planet, the home world of the Anunnaki. It's a wanderer, an elliptical traveller through our solar system, with an orbit so vast it takes thousands of our Earth years to complete. The Sumerians, with their astonishingly advanced astronomical knowledge that, frankly, baffles modern science for its accuracy, tracked this celestial behemoth. They didn't just name it, they detailed its path, its characteristics, and its profound influence on our system. And crucially, they linked its periodic proximity to Earth with the comings and goings of the Anunnaki. It was their transport, their vessel, their celestial home base. So the prophecy of their return isn't just a random event. It's tied to the very physics of their existence, to the grand celestial clock that governs their journey. Imagine the implications. If Nibiru is indeed real, and if its orbit periodically brings it close enough to Earth for interstellar travel to be feasible, then the Anunnaki's presence here was always cyclical, always temporary, always bound by the celestial mechanics of their home world. Their great withdrawal wasn't a choice to leave forever. It was a necessary retreat as Nibiru moved away, taking them with it, only to return when the planet swung back into our neighborhood. This transforms the entire narrative from a mysterious disappearance into a predictable, albeit vast, cycle of engagement. But let's be clear, this wasn't a passive waiting game for them. The Anunnaki, masters of long-term strategy, didn't just leave us a prophecy, they left us a system. A meticulously crafted framework designed to ensure their legacy, and indeed, their eventual re-entry. They established kingship, not as a human invention, but as a divine institution, where earthly rulers were seen as direct intermediaries, chosen by the gods to govern humanity. The Fiyas, those divine decrees and blueprints for civilization, were handed down, shaping everything from law to agriculture, ensuring human society developed along lines beneficial to their creators. Think about the ziggurats, those massive stepped temples reaching for the sky. We've discussed them as communication hubs, as landing pads, as symbols of Anunnaki presence. But they also served another, more subtle purpose. They were constant, monumental reminders of humanity's connection to the heavens, to the gods who resided there. They were architectural anchors perpetuating the belief system, the reverence, and the expectation of divine interaction. Every ritual performed, every offering made, every prayer uttered was a reinforcement of the Anunnaki's authority, a subtle preparation for their eventual return. The very concept of religion, as we understand it, becomes a powerful tool in this grand design. It instills obedience, fear, and devotion. It creates a narrative of divine authority that transcends generations, ensuring that even in their physical absence, the Anunnaki remained the ultimate arbiters of human destiny. The priests, the kings, the entire social hierarchy was built upon this foundation, all serving, consciously or unconsciously, to maintain the structure for their return. Now let's consider the nature of this prophesied return. The ancient texts offer us tantalizing yet ambiguous clues. Will it be a benevolent re-engagement, with Enki returning as a wise mentor, perhaps even proud of humanity's progress? Or will it be a demanding reassertion of control, with Enlil, ever the stern disciplinarian, returning to find humanity strayed too far from its original purpose as Lulu Amelu, the primitive worker? The very idea sends shivers down the spine, doesn't it? If we are, as the texts suggest, an engineered species, a Lulu Amelu designed for a specific purpose, then what does their return signify for our autonomy, for our very sense of self? We've spent millennia building civilizations, exploring science, creating art, defining our own morality. We've even dared to look to the stars ourselves, dreaming of exploration and discovery. But what if all of this has been happening under the watchful, patient gaze of our creators, a grand experiment unfolding, waiting for its next phase? That blood of a god within us, the very spark of Anunnaki consciousness that Enki so cunningly fused with our primitive ancestors. What dormant potential does it hold, waiting for the signal? Is there a genetic trigger, a latent capacity that will activate upon their return, perhaps allowing us to better understand their intentions, or even to resist them? The Sumerian accounts hint at humanity's increasing intelligence and even defiance, leading to Enlil's frustration and the Great Flood. This suggests that the blood of a god imparted more than mere obedience. It gave us a spark of their own complex nature, their capacity for creativity, ambition, and even rebellion. The uncertainty is the beating heart of this mystery. Are we to be greeted as prodigal children who have thrived, or as runaway assets needing to be brought back into line? Will they marvel at our advancements, or will they see our technological prowess as a dangerous deviation from their original blueprint? The texts don't give us easy answers, but they force us to confront uncomfortable questions about our origins and our future. This prophecy isn't just about ancient history, it's profoundly relevant to our present. In an age where we grapple with questions of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and the search for extraterrestrial life, the Anunnaki narrative offers a chilling reflection. What if we are the product of such an intervention? What if our entire history, our very evolution, has been guided, if not dictated, by beings who saw us as a solution to their own problems? The truth you haven't heard isn't just about what happened millennia ago. It's about what could happen, what the ancients believed would happen. It challenges us to look beyond the conventional narratives of human progress and to consider a more complex, more unsettling origin story. The Anunnaki left us a legacy of knowledge, a blueprint for civilization, and the very essence of their genetic material. but they also left us with a ticking clock, a prophecy of their return, the ultimate test of humanity's true nature and our place in the cosmic order. As we stand on the precipice of this ancient prophecy, looking up at the same stars the Sumerians watched, the question isn't if they return, but when, and what will happen when they do. Will we be ready to meet our makers, and what will they demand of us? The implications are staggering, and they compel us to continue our journey, to delve deeper into the fragments of the past for the answers that might define our future. Welcome back to Quote 1.6, where we continue to peel back the layers of history, challenging what we think we know about our very origins. If you've been with us since the beginning, you understand that the Anunnaki were not ethereal gods, but physical beings, driven by tangible needs. They engineered us, humanity, for a singular purpose: to serve. But here's where the narrative twists, where the carefully laid plans of these ancient architects seem to unravel in the most profound ways. This is where the truth you haven't heard truly begins to resonate, not just in the dusty annals of Sumerian texts, but within the very fabric of our being. We've explored the Great Withdrawal, the Anunnaki's calculated retreat, leaving behind a structured civilization and a prophecy of return. They became the quote 10, observing from a distance, allowing humanity to flourish, or so it seemed. But this leads us to a crucial, almost existential question. If we were engineered for servitude, how do we explain the incredible, often rebellious trajectory of human civilization? How do we account for our insatiable drive to innovate, to create, to explore, and yes, even to challenge the very concept of divine authority? Think about this for a second. We were designed as the Lulu Amelu, the primitive worker, a species crafted to alleviate the Anunnaki's toil. Yet, look at us now. We build cities that touch the clouds, compose symphonies that stir the soul, unravel the mysteries of the atom, and gaze at the stars with an innate yearning to reach them. Is this merely the efficient functioning of a well-designed program, or is there something more? This is the beating heart of the mystery, the paradox that genuinely rattles the foundations of our understanding, the enigma of human free will. When Enki, the master engineer, infused the quote of terrestrial hominids with the quote 110, what exactly did he impart? Was it merely the intelligence needed for complex tasks, the resilience required for arduous labour? Or did that divine spark, that fragment of Anunnaki essence, contain something more potent, something that transcended the blueprint of a servant? We are talking about the very core of our being, our capacity for abstract thought, our boundless creativity, our unyielding ambition, and yes, even our propensity for rebellion. Consider the sweep of human history. We don't just follow orders, we question them. We don't just maintain, we innovate. We don't just exist, we strive for meaning, for transcendence, for self-determination. From ancient philosophers challenging the capricious nature of their gods to modern scientists pushing the boundaries of knowledge, there's an inherent drive within us to break free from limitations, to understand, and often to master our own destiny. Could this be an unintended consequence of the Anunnaki's genetic tinkering? A glitch in the system, where the very essence of their own complex, emotional and ambitious nature was inadvertently passed on, creating a species far more dynamic and unpredictable than they intended? Or, and this is where it gets truly intriguing, was it a deliberate, subtle enhancement, designed to create a more resilient, adaptable, and ultimately a more sophisticated species capable of evolving to serve a future, more complex purpose. This brings us to the Anunnaki as, quote one lesson. Their withdrawal wasn't an abandonment, it was a strategic disengagement, a period of observation. But what exactly are they observing? Are they simply charting our progress from a detached cosmic distance, like scientists monitoring an experiment? Or is their influence more direct, more subtle, perhaps even guiding our development in ways we haven't yet comprehended? It's no coincidence, we believe, that humanity stands on the precipice of mastering technologies that eerily mirror the capabilities attributed to the Anunnaki themselves. Think about it. Genetic engineering. We are now capable of editing the very blueprint of life, a power once reserved for the Denyach and quote 112 who created us. Artificial intelligence. We are crafting sentient machines, capable of learning and problem-solving, perhaps echoing the advanced systems the Anunnaki would have utilized. And then there's space exploration. Our rockets pierce the heavens. Our probes venture into the farthest reaches of our solar system, driven by an innate, almost primordial urge to explore the cosmos, the very domain from which the Anunnaki arrived. Could the Watchers be subtly influencing our technological leaps? Are there whispers in the minds of our most brilliant scientists, unexplained breakthroughs that seem to arrive fully formed, sudden intuitive leaps that defy conventional explanation? Perhaps the Anunnaki are not just observing, perhaps they are providing subtle nudges, guiding humanity towards specific advancements. They might be preparing us, consciously or unconsciously, to fulfill a new, more sophisticated role upon their return, a role that moves beyond mere mining and labour. After all, a more advanced, self-sufficient and technologically capable humanity would be a far more valuable asset than a primitive workforce. They might be shaping us into collaborators, or perhaps into a species capable of understanding and accepting their true nature without outright societal collapse. This leads us directly to the prophecy of their return. It is woven into the very fabric of ancient texts, a cyclical event tied to the multi-thousand-year orbit of their home planet Nibiru. If their return is indeed imminent, what will their expectations be? This is not just a historical curiosity, it's a question that could redefine our future. Will they see us as successful caretakers of the civilization they gifted us, a species that has grown and thrived under their distant gaze? Or will they view us as a rebellious experiment that has strayed too far from its original purpose, a project that needs to be reset, or perhaps brought back under direct control? Will they demand resources again? Perhaps a different kind of resource given our technological evolution? Will they seek to re-establish direct governance, dismantling the political and religious structures we have painstakingly built over millennia? The nature of their message when it comes will be critical. Will it be a benevolent reunion, a grand revelation of cosmic truths and our place within them? Or will it be a stark, perhaps even terrifying reminder of our engineered origin, a reassertion of dominion by our creators? They might reveal the full, unvarnished truth of our creation, the intricate history of their planet, and the wider, breathtakingly complex cosmic landscape that exists beyond our current comprehension. Imagine the immediate seismic impact of such a revelation on our world. Religious institutions founded on interpretations of divinity that often elevate ethereal, unknowable beings would face an unprecedented crisis. Would they collapse under the weight of a physical extraterrestrial? Quote, 13. Who walks among us? Or would they undergo radical reinterpretation, finding new meaning in ancient texts now stripped of metaphor? Governments and societal structures built on human-centric ideologies would grapple with an entirely new power dynamic. Would humanity unite in awe and welcome, or would fear and defiance lead to unprecedented global chaos? For the scientific community, it would be both the ultimate validation and the ultimate paradigm shift. So many. Quote 114. Theories would suddenly be propelled into the mainstream, while established scientific models would have to be radically revised. The individual, faced with the undeniable truth of our engineered genesis, would confront an existential crisis unlike any before. Are we truly free, or living out a sophisticated program? Are our dreams, our passions, our very consciousness merely echoes of a divine blueprint? Or would this knowledge liberate us, offering a new understanding of our potential and our place in a grander cosmic tapestry? The reappearance of the Anunnaki would shatter our current understanding of history, religion, and humanity's place in the cosmos. It would force us to redefine what it means to be human, to confront the possibility that our destiny has always been intertwined with beings from another world. We stand at a crossroads, gazing into a future where the line between myth and reality blurs beyond recognition. The Watchers are out there, and the prophecy of their return echoes across the millennia. What will they expect? What will they reveal? And how will humanity, a species born of their design yet imbued with an undeniable spirit of its own, respond to the ultimate reunion with its creators? These are not just questions for ancient historians or fringe theorists. These are questions for us, for humanity, as we navigate a future that may soon be inextricably linked to the truth you haven't heard. The next chapter will explore the profound implications of this potential future and how we, as a species, might prepare for the return of our... Quote 115. We've traced the Anunnaki's journey from the heavens to earth, witnessed their grueling labor, and dissected their ingenious, if controversial solution, the creation of humanity. We've watched them withdraw, leaving behind a meticulously designed blueprint for civilization, and pondered the enigma of human free will. But now, as we push further into the heart of this mystery, we must confront the most profound prophecy, the one that redefines everything we thought we knew about our past, present, and future: their return. This isn't some vague spiritual hope or an abstract religious promise. No, the ancient Sumerian texts, those dusty clay tablets etched with the world's first writing, speak of a return that is both physical and cyclical, inextricably linked to the mechanics of the cosmos. They speak of Nibiru. What is Nibiru? For centuries, it has been dismissed as myth, a fanciful celestial body from a forgotten cosmology. But let's look closer at what the Sumerians themselves described. They called it the planet of the crossing, a celestial body with an extraordinarily long elliptical orbit that periodically brings it into our solar system. Imagine a cosmic clock, ticking away millennia, with Nibiru as its most crucial hand. The Sumerians, with their astonishingly accurate astronomical knowledge that still baffles modern science, didn't just mention Nibiru. They wove it into the very fabric of their creation myths and their understanding of the Anunnaki's comings and goings. Think about this for a second. If the Anunnaki, quote 117, and if their arrival was tied to the presence of their homeworld, then a cyclical return of that homeworld would logically presage their own re-engagement. This isn't just a convenient narrative, it's a fundamental piece of the puzzle that makes the Anunnaki story far more coherent than any traditional, quote, teen narrative. Gods don't need a planet to travel on. Extraterrestrial beings might. The ancient texts, particularly the Enuma Elish and other cosmological tablets, describe Nibiru as a massive, powerful entity, influencing the orbits of other planets as it makes its way through our system. It's depicted not just as a planet, but as a celestial commander, a king among stars, its very presence signalling monumental shifts. This is where the narrative gets genuinely chilling. If the Anunnaki's initial arrival was driven by a desperate need for resources, specifically gold to repair Nibiru's atmosphere, then what might their return signify? Is it merely a check-up on their old mining operation, or something far more complex? We've already explored the Anunnaki's long-term planning, their strategic withdrawal, and their role as watchers. Now we see that this wasn't a spontaneous abandonment, but a calculated disengagement, a phase within a much grander cycle. The Great Withdrawal, then, was simply an interim period, a time for humanity to develop, to process the blueprint they'd been given, and perhaps to evolve into something more than just primitive labourers. The ziggurats, those monumental structures dotting the Mesopotamian landscape, suddenly take on a new layer of meaning. They weren't just temples for worship, they were communication hubs, observation posts, perhaps even landing pads, designed to maintain a connection across the vast stretches of time and space, awaiting the next celestial alignment. The prophecies of their return aren't vague, esoteric whispers. They are embedded in the very cyclical nature of Sumerian cosmology. The Sumerians understood time not as a linear progression, but as a series of repeating cycles, great years or ages, each marked by celestial events. The return of Nibiru was not an anomaly, but a scheduled appointment. This cyclical worldview permeated their understanding of civilization itself. Periods of enlightenment and prosperity followed by periods of chaos and renewal, often linked to the presence or absence of their divine patrons. Consider the implications. Humanity has been, in essence, on a cosmic timer. Every innovation, every societal leap, every technological advancement we've made could be viewed through the lens of this impending reunion. Were we meant to reach a certain level of technological sophistication? Were we meant to harness the very powers they once wielded, such as genetic manipulation or space travel? Our current rapid acceleration in these fields, mirroring the Anunnaki's own capabilities, feels less like a coincidence and more like a fulfillment of a pre-programmed trajectory. Think about our relentless drive to explore space. We launch probes, send rovers to Mars, build space stations. We dream of colonizing other planets. Is this innate human curiosity, or is it an echo of the blood of a god within us, a genetic imperative implanted by Enki, propelling us towards the stars, towards them? Could it be that our present technological prowess, our ability to manipulate genetics, to create artificial intelligence, to build machines that think and learn, is not just a testament to our ingenuity, but a demonstration of our readiness? The Sumerian texts, when viewed through this lens, become more than just ancient myths. They become a historical record and a future prophecy rolled into one. They speak of the Anunnaki's initial arrival, the genesis of humanity, and the establishment of civilization as foundational events. But they also hint at the conditions for their return. They suggest that the gods would monitor humanity's progress, observing how we managed the gifts they bestowed upon us. Would we maintain order? Would we wisely use the knowledge of agriculture, metallurgy, and governance? Or would we descend into chaos and self-destruction? This brings us to the ultimate question. Why would they return? Is it for more gold? Perhaps to replenish dwindling resources from their long interstellar journey? Or is it to check on their experiment to see if their creation, humanity, has evolved into a species worthy of a new, more complex role? Perhaps they return to reclaim control, to re-establish the hierarchy that placed them as rulers and us as servants. Or could it be a benevolent return, a guiding hand to lead humanity to the next stage of cosmic evolution, to integrate us into a larger galactic community? The nature of this reunion is the beating heart of the mystery, the truth that genuinely rattles the foundations of our understanding. If the Anunnaki were indeed physical beings, driven by tangible needs and emotional complexities, then their return would not be a gentle spiritual awakening. It would be a monumental physical event, capable of reshaping not just our history, but our entire future. Imagine the global upheaval, the re-evaluation of every religious text, every historical narrative, every scientific theory. Our identity as a species, our very place in the cosmos, would be irrevocably altered. The prophecies are not just about their return, but about our role in it. Are we prepared for the architects of our civilization to reappear? Have we lived up to the potential they saw in us, or have we squandered it? The ES quote 124 isn't merely that they existed, but that they are coming back, and their return is a scheduled event, etched into the very fabric of our ancient past and hurtling towards our uncertain future. The question isn't if they return, but when, and what role we are meant to play in the grand cosmic drama they set in motion millennia ago.